Hi, everybody. I'm Pastor Dale at Shepherd of the Ridge Lutheran Church in North Ridgeville, Ohio. And I couldn't be there with you today, and so Pastor Rob asked that I do a recording instead, which is to your advantage because that means that I can actually edit things down to 45 minutes. And so I want you to know that while I encourage you to take notes, I'm not doing a handout for this, like the PowerPoint stuff, because I think you learn better from actually jotting things down. And at the same time, if you miss anything, or if you want to share this with somebody else, or you think it's so terrible that you just have to show it to people like a sort of dirty sock where you go, oh, smell this, oh, this is terrible. So you can find the recording of this. It'll be uploaded by the end of the conference at youtube.com/user/SOTRidge, which you can see at the bottom of the screen right now. So today's topic is I'm doing sort of a swath of different things involving in transforming a church, and so I'm going to be hitting on just a very wide variety of topics, not really zooming specifically in on anything in particular. Any one of the points that I make could be an entire presentation, but I only have 45 minutes. So just quickly, a little bit about me. I suppose you could sum it up that the reason that I'm not here today is because right now, while you're watching this, I'm at home watching my 6 kids while my wife is picking up the seventh one in college. And my youngest one, when you see this, well, she's not quite one yet. So, um, and one other point that I want to make before I jump into this is just a comment on the title. Whenever people see church growth, they automatically think of the church growth movement, which was popular at the sort of second half of the 20th century. It's pretty much dead now. Ever since Willow Creek came out with their Reveal study and figured out that really the sort of church growth concepts where you sort of water things down to attract people, the whole attractional model in and of itself was just broken. And so what we're talking about here is while you do some attractional things, anybody that says they don't do attractional, just check and see if you have heating or air conditioning in your church, and then answer that question. And at the same time, what we're talking about is not just numbers. And while Jesus did say, "Go make disciples of all nations," and that sort of implies something about numbers there, that he wants us to get the gospel to all people. What we're talking about is growth among people, making disciples. And so, some people say, I've heard this expression as a response to the church growth movement, where people say, "Is our church growing?" "Yes, we grow together every Sunday." And my reaction to that is, really? Are you? I mean, like, do you actually know that? Can you prove it? Because just because people are sitting in their seats doesn't mean that they're actually growing. They may not be paying attention at all. And or maybe they are, but it's so negligible that you could barely notice it. You just sort of have to believe it. And while I'm all for believing, um, at the same time, I think that if you had a hospital and people went there and they never got better, you never saw any kind of improvement, you'd really question the effectiveness of that hospital. And I think the same needs to be said for our churches. If we're not seeing a change in individuals over time, you really have to question, is there any point to them coming? Or are we just sort of doing maintenance? So let's just jump in. And the first thing, before we talk about transforming, you have to understand that you've got to count the cost before you begin. All right? And if you're just starting out in this, or haven't started yet, you've got to know that it's going to be hard. All right? And everybody goes, "Oh, yeah, I know it's going to be." No, 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 no. It's going to be hard. Some people say, I've seen this on T-shirt, it said something like, "Church planting is for wimps. Revitalize an old congregation." And and there's truth in that. I mean, nothing against church planners. They really have their work cut out for them, and I couldn't do it. But revitalizing a congregation, it has the advantage that you have some resources, a core group of people to start out with. It has the disadvantage that you've got all of these traditions that you're working against, and the older your church is, the the harder it is to break through those traditions. And because of that, sometimes you need a wildfire to remove old growth so that new seeds and saplings can grow. You know, oftentimes, like in California, you hear about these terrible wildfires, and the real tragic part of it is not that there's a wildfire, because that's completely natural. The tragic thing is that people build their houses too close to some of these areas, and there's other effects that impact people's lives. People get hurt, they lose their possessions and things like that. But but in a forest, that wildfire is necessary, because otherwise what happens is the old trees form this canopy, and it gets real dark down at the bottom of the forest, and the sunlight can't get there, and so the new seeds and saplings, they can't grow, and there's no space for them to grow, and it creates a huge problem. And so God designed forests to deal with this. By every once in a while, you get a fire that goes through there, and it just burns out the old stuff, and all of a sudden there's all kinds of sunlight. There's the nutrients from the old, what's now ash, for the ground and things like that, and it can start fresh. And well, I mean, we're talking about people here, and and so it's a little different from losing a few trees, but it's important to understand that there are times where it's just hard to deal with different situations, different people, and they'll fight you and resist you, even though this change is absolutely necessary and you know it's right. There's people that are going to say, well, if you do this, I'm going to leave, right? And at that point, you can spend a whole lot of time arguing with them or pleading with them to stay. And certainly you want to say, I care about you, and I really hate for you to lose. And if I'm assuming that you're like me, that you really mean it. You don't want to lose these people. You care about them, and you'll miss them. But at the same time, God has called you to his kingdom, not to individual people's preferences. And so that means that as long as you pander to people, then not only are you stopping the work of the kingdom, you're actually hurting that person, because what you're doing is you're sort of treating them like a spoiled child. And they say, no, I'm going to hold my breath, or whatever. I'm going to have a tantrum until you give in. And then you give in, and you're just saying, look, tantrums are the proper way to respond. Or, running away from things that you don't like is the proper way to respond. But, Jesus said that we need to pick up our crosses and follow him. St. Paul said to be transformed by the renewing of your mind, and to offer ourselves as a living sacrifice. And that means stepping out of our comfort zone and dealing with things that we're not comfortable with. I know that there have been all kinds of things as we've been going through the process that have made me really uncomfortable, but it had to happen. And there were people that left that I didn't expect to leave, people that I tried to get on board, and they weren't. It just, for one reason or another, it just didn't work for them. All right, and so then what you do, you still care for them, and you say, if you're not going to be here, let me help you find another place that will work for you. And because what it comes down to is, if people have been regularly attending, and all of a sudden they leave, more often than not, they're going somewhere else. They're not going to just stop going to church, right? And in fact, they may leave and then wait for you to leave, and think that maybe you, because you're the pastor or some other major influential leader, that if you leave, then maybe things will go back to normal, and they're just going to kind of wait and see, and they'll stay in touch with their friends at church and things like that. So if people start leaving, not only don't be afraid, but don't be surprised, right? It happens. It happens every time, but that's okay, and be okay with that. All right. Number two, and this is going to be your biggest struggle right here. Sacred cows are golden calves, right? When Elijah called Elisha to follow him, Elisha he was working, he was pushing a plow and had all of these, like 12 oxen pulling this cow. He had some money, and it was a lucrative business. And so he sacrificed the cows and he burned the plow. No going back. We're moving forward, and this is the way it is. You may have heard the story of Cortez when he came over to what is now Central America with the Spaniards, that once they landed, they burned the ships. He said, "Look, we're going to make it or we're going to die," and so sometimes you need to do that, and you can have all kinds of sacred cows that we've always done our services this way, or we've always had these particular groups, our ladies group or our choir or our men's group, or we've always done Sunday school this way, or even Sunday school, vacation Bible school, all kinds of things that Christmas programs, and we've always done them a certain way, and we don't want to change that, right? But sometimes it's necessary, and if you start worshiping the way you do something or a particular group within the church, right, then you might as well just take a picture of that and put that on your altar and get rid of the crosses and just be honest about what idol you're worshiping, right? But if you want to worship Jesus and you want to follow his plan, then you need to recognize that the kingdom of God comes before any of those other things. Right? And so now the first thing you need, and you may think that we've got all kinds of needs. We've got problems with our discipleship program. We don't have enough money. We need more people. All kinds of things. But really, what you need first is vision. Now, what you see on the side there, that is a pictorial representation of the vision at Shepherd of the Ridge Lutheran Church. That we are grounded in the Word, and that leads us to worship God, not only on Sunday morning, but throughout our whole lives, and to witness to others, and so that, as our statement says, we are connecting people of our community to Christ's love through compassion and kindness. And this, everything that we do, revolves around this concept. It took us 2 years to get this all figured out, right? Usually it doesn't take that long. We were thorough, okay? And that's what we're going with on this, all right? And so the first thing you need to do is figure out who you are and be who God made you to be, all right? And you may have heard this, or why did God put this particular group of people in this particular place at this particular time, right? And you can sort of gather around it. Everyone can talk about it, and you come up with a great idea, right? But those are all your ideas, and it's not really making an educated look at it. And so what you need to do is let the needs of your community set your agenda. Now, if you check out the book, I highly recommend Church Unique. It's what we used. There's probably other stuff out there, but I've never seen anything that comes anywhere close to what that book does. And if you go through the Transforming Churches process, that is the book that you will use. And what it comes down to is we have these ideas like, oh, we need to do this and we need to do that, and but really, is that really what you need to do because that's the way you've always done it? What are the actual needs of your community? And let that dictate what you're doing and why you're doing it. Is everything you do as a congregation should point people to Jesus Christ in some way. And we do things for all kinds of reasons. But you have to ask, why are we doing this? Why do we exist as a church? We so often we do things to entertain people or to, things like that. But with everything you do, right, ask, how is this pointing people to Jesus? How is this connecting people with God and bringing them into the kingdom and helping them grow spiritually and things like that? And sometimes what you're doing is all right, but you just need to tweak it a little bit. Other times you need to scrap it and start over from scratch. And sometimes it's helping to build relationships that are going to build Christian community that is going to help people in their faith. Um, Other times, it's not really doing a whole lot. And so, even look at not only is it, but how is it, and how much is it, and are there other ways that we could be accomplishing that goal that are better than what we're doing now? So, a couple years ago, I watched a video on outreach, and it had some interesting ideas. And I was watching it with a woman who became our first discipleship director, and we get all done, and there's all these neat ideas about inviting people to your Easter service and things like that. And she says, Pastor, all of this outreach stuff is sort of useless if we don't have discipleship, if we're not actually helping people grow in their faith. And by the way, that's how she became my first discipleship director. I mean, I already had her in mind, but boy, when she made that comment, it was like, yep, she's the one. And she did a great job to get us started out. And so the first thing to know is that you need to be the kind of church that God would want to multiply. Sometimes people go, boy, we've tried so many things, and no matter what we do, and we followed all of these different codes and ideas and things like that, and just nothing's worked. And so what's going on? What are we doing wrong? Right? And the answer to that question might just be, well, take a look at your church. Is it a bunch of selfish people that will only do things if it's the way that they want it to be done, and they're not really growing, and it's really all about me, and what I want, and not about serving the needs of the community and bringing the message of salvation to others? Well, if it is, then why would God want to bring lots of people into that? Because when people see, when your guests come in and they see what the people there are like, if they end up joining your congregation or sticking around for any period of time, then over time they're going to say, oh, well, that's how people behave here. That's what people act like. That's the attitude around here, and that's what's expected. And so that's what I'm going to be like. Well, if we're bringing people in and we're teaching them to be selfish and it's all about me, then really, I mean, do we even want to do that? I would say no, we don't. Why would we want to do that? And certainly that's not something that God wants you to be. And so right now, here at Shepherd of the Ridge, we haven't done a whole lot yet with outreach because we're still working on discipleship. Now, I mean, you're never going to have it perfect, all right? But at the same time, are you working on it? Are you developing that? And we're just, now that we've sort of kicked off our discipleship process, then after that, as we're becoming at least the kind of church that God would want to multiply, now we're starting to focus on our outreach. But discipleship has to come first, all right? Which leads to the next point. Have a yellow brick road, all right? In The Wizard of Oz, the original, Dorothy starts out in the little spirally thing in Munchkinland, and she starts out right at the beginning. But along the way, other people join up with her. You have the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman and the Lion, and they join up with her along the way. And they don't start at the same spot. And in our churches, we tend to have this process that, okay, once a person is baptized, that's sort of Munchkinland, all right? And then along the way, you go through Sunday school and confirmation class, and then you hit adult, and there's this time often that there's this sort of youth group phase before that, where oftentimes we lose people because there's not a lot of spiritual growth going on. It's more sort of take them to amusement parks and rock concerts and things, and not a lot of focus on actual growth. And then you become an adult and don't really fit in with the 30-something and 40-something people that are attending the Bible classes or older. And nothing against anyone who's older, understand, but there's just a big difference between where you have this sort of segregation of ages, all right? And so what you need to do is you need to have a process so that anybody who comes along can jump on that discipleship path and be able to move forward. And that's actually what we're working on right now. So I couldn't even give you the details of how to do that. And different churches are going to do it differently. But you need to figure out, okay, so when someone is baptized as a baby, what's the path to them that's going to take them all the way from being a new baby to being someone who is making disciples? Not just who is a disciple, but who's making disciples. And then for those who come in through, if you have a preschool program or a day school, or you invite them through Vacation Bible School or whatever else, however else they come in as children, how do you get your children on the path of discipleship? And those who are in high school, I mean, keep in mind, as you go through this, something I've often emphasized is that children are not the future of the church. They are the church. They're the church now. No matter how old, no matter how young, they are the church. All right? And so that means they are called to make disciples too. And so we need to be teaching them how to do that as soon as they're, from early on. Right? And small children, Jesus said we need to be like them. And somehow we get that all mixed up and we go, well, first we need to teach them to think like adults. And then we'll teach them how to do it. No. That's backwards. We need to start thinking like kids. A kid can just like go up to a classmate and start talking to them and they can tell them Jesus loves you and they, oh, okay, and not a big deal. We get all flustered about it. We need to start thinking like children. And so that means that we can't hold our kids back and go, well, you're not ready to make disciples yet. You know what? The disciples weren't ready to make disciples, but God works through us. And so have that path for an adult, someone who's not even a Christian that comes in. Someone who, whether they're an atheist, whether they're a Muslim or Hindu, or someone who just really hasn't thought about faith and God and things like that before. What's the path for that person? How do they get on board and start growing on the path to spiritual growth and learning how to make disciples and wanting to make disciples and having a sense of this is really important because Jesus is awesome and I want other people to know him and I want people to experience the joy that I've experienced and to really live out their faith and to see how that works in their life. And so it means being intentional about having a process to know how to do that. And that means a lot of meetings and a lot of work. But start working on it. And one thing that we have found very early on is that's working for us is intergenerational. All right? Super, super important. If you can pull it off, so important. For us, it's just meant our small groups, that once kids are confirmed, or once they hit high school, wherever you want to make the cutoff, they can become part of the small groups. And we've found already, just a few months into it, that this is a great way to do intergenerational stuff. And because if your small group is hitting on sort of stuff that you're dealing with in life, and it's not just sort of get together and what's the historical context of this passage, and then everybody leaves. If you're getting together and talking about your struggles and confessing sin to each other and things like that, to get our kids on board so that they're old enough to be able to understand what confidentiality means, right? But you don't have to wait until they're adults. What happens is they become mentored through that process. They see that when you become adult, you don't all of a sudden have things figured out. But they also develop relationships, and studies have found over and over that one of the most important things in the spiritual life of a child is to have another adult at church or in their faith community, whatever terminology you use, who takes an active role in their lives in some way. The mentoring, modeling, so that they know somebody at church cares about me besides just mom and dad. And that just makes a huge difference. And getting somebody involved in the discipleship process in a cross-generational uh, system where people are just going through life together, and you've got older people and younger people, and they're all mixed up together, then you solve that problem. And it's beautiful because the younger ones have insights that the older ones wouldn't think of, and vice versa. And and so it develops a beautiful system. And you know what? It's not hard. It's just a matter of, it can start out by having some of the dads in the group bring their sons, or the moms bring their daughters, or I mean, in our church we have same-sex groups, but to bring their kids to the groups and not be afraid to be real around their kids. And once you get that started, then it just goes from there, because then once there's a few of the teens there, then they're going to be more comfortable inviting their friends and things like that, and it just goes from there. So have that yellow brick road, have that process for all different people, and figure out how are they going to get involved in this process and learn what it means to be a disciple of Jesus Christ, and what it means to make disciples, and how you do that. And so that leads us next to outreach. Once you're making disciples and you figured out how to do that, then you want to make disciples of all nations, not just of the people that are gathering on Sunday morning. And so the first step with that, don't flock shoot. When I was a kid, when I first took my hunter safety classes and went deer hunting with my dad, I realized I couldn't hit a thing. I'd see a whole herd of deer go by, and I would just kind of shoot into the herd, and usually didn't hit anything. I mean, one time I actually hit something, and I could tell by the way it jumped that I hit it in the rump. It ran away. I felt terrible because now this animal is suffering, and I, to this day I feel terrible about it. And but we have this tendency to do outreach by it's like going duck hunting and taking your rifle and shooting it up into the sky, and then looking to see if there's any ducks up there. Well, hello, maybe you should actually find the duck first and take aim and then shoot. All right, and the same goes for outreach. Like, we do these activities. Well, let's try this thing, or let's try that thing, and let's do a carnival, or let's do a door to door, or whatever it is, and let's see if it works. Well, instead of just sort of randomly trying things to see what happens, how about you actually figure out what are the needs of the community? What is it that we need to focus on? What are the actual needs that we have the ability to meet? Here in North Ridgeville, we discovered that there's a huge need that parents don't know how to communicate with their kids, that they hardly see their kids. When they do, they're so busy that there's just not a lot of communication going on. And we said, well, gee, we've got trained foster parents in our congregation that have been trained in all kinds of parenting techniques and things like that. We've got a lot of just parents that have figured this stuff out and have great relationships with their kids. We've got the message of the gospel, and we found that, boy, when you bring Jesus into a situation, it changes things. And so we said, this is something that we can do something about. And so we've made it our focus. How can we reach struggling, overwhelmed families? It's part of our vision, and that's what we're focusing on. We're not just randomly trying things. I mean, there's still a little trial and error, but at least we have a general idea, and as time goes on, we'll be able to focus more and more, right? And the next thing is being missional, right? You can have the coolest worship service ever, and nobody's going to come, or maybe a few people will. And as long as you've got the coolest thing in town, they'll come to your thing, and then as soon as somebody's better than you, they'll stop coming by you, and they're not really going to grow. I mean, that was the whole kind of seeker concept, and it didn't work. Yeah, people might come, but they're not actually growing. They just feel good. You tickle their ears a little bit. And what we need to do for outreach is to actually get out into the community, to meet those needs, to do as much as you can off campus. If you have discipleship groups meeting or things like that, get off campus, get away from the church property. All right? Even just because if you're having a group meeting, people will be more unchurched people or people that have not been at church for a very long time. They're going to be much more comfortable coming to a group that meets in somebody's house or at a restaurant or out in the park or something like that, instead of a group that meets at a church. Because people just have this idea like, oh, if I go to a church, there's weird things going to happen there, and the roof will fall in on me, or something like that. God's going to zap me because I don't belong at church or something like that. Right? So get out in the community, but recognize what are the needs of the community and how can we meet those needs. What's going on out there, and so let's actually get into the lives of others instead of expecting them to come into our life. Sometimes we have the attitude that the missionaries used to have, that you have some missionary go down to South America to some tribe in the jungle somewhere that's never been touched by modern society, whatever was modern at the time, and so they would bring down copper kettles and muskets and all this sort of stuff, and they would teach them how to shoot and how to cook properly, and they'd teach them to speak English or whatever language they were speaking, and once you had all of that, this sort of Western culture, then we'll tell you about Jesus, right? Hello, that's backwards, all right, and that's ridiculous, and I'm really glad that we don't do things like that anymore. Oh, except we kind of do, because if you want to come to our church, you've got to come to us. We're not going to go to you, and you've got to learn to speak our language, and you've got to learn all of this stuff. And there's a pretty steep list of things that you need to the hoops that you need to jump through if you want to be a Christian, or at least if you want to be a Christian here. And a lot of things that have nothing to do with the gospel, nothing to do with the kingdom of God, or very vaguely, but not really critical. And so as we do outreach, we need to speak the language of our culture. Right? Now, that doesn't mean we need to be, if you live in an area where there's a lot of vulgarity or something like that, it's not necessary that you do that. Right? But at the same time, you need to recognize what people's values are. And if everybody's watching a particular show, then maybe you want to check that show out. Right? If everybody's interested in certain things, likes to go to certain local games or whatever it is, you probably want to check that out and get involved and hang out where people are hanging out and stuff like that. Get in people's lives and don't treat people like projects. Right? People are not projects. They're people that Jesus loves. Right? So just love them. And if they don't respond, or it takes a long time to be able to get the gospel to them, and then you even do communicate the gospel to them, and they just kind of go, "Whoa, I'm not into that." All right, that doesn't mean you stop loving them, right? If they sort of respond negatively when you have that opportunity to share the gospel with them, and and you just kind of go, "Well, I tried it here. Now I'm gonna go somewhere else, or give up on that one." No, God doesn't give up on people, and neither should we. Man, if God gave up on us, boy, this world would have ended a long time ago. But God is patient, and we need to be patient too. But more than that, Jesus told us to love your neighbor as yourself. And that means that you're going to care about them regardless what you get out of them. People are not merit badges. They're God's children, whether they know it or not. And so we need to love them that way, right? And that leads to the next thing, that personal connections can neither be substituted nor faked, right? You cannot fake a personal connection with someone. If you see someone as a project, and you try very hard not to treat them that way, they'll see through you. They'll recognize it, and they'll be insulted, and they'll feel objectified, and they'll be right to feel that way, because we shouldn't treat people like objects or trophies. And you can't substitute either. I'm an introvert. Right? That's not the reason that I'm doing this via video, but I have a hard time in social situations. It just doesn't come naturally for me. It's work, and yet I do care about the people that I'm communicating with. And so that means that I do need to get out and communicate with people, even if it's difficult. And yeah, I can do so much on Facebook and things like that, but there's limits. And until I'm ready to get into people's lives and be involved in that sort of face-to-face stuff, it's just not the same. So then, looking forward at the future, the most important thing that you need to do is plan for succession. Right? The simple reality is that you are not going to live forever on this planet and where you're at. You're going to live forever because Jesus died on the cross for you and rose again and won eternal life for you. Right? But pastors, the church that you're at is hopefully going to outlast you. Right? Which means that you are either going to go to heaven, or you are going to take a call somewhere else, or you are going to retire. Okay? And so that means that when that time comes, you need to be ready for whoever it is to come in and take over for you. And because the ministry is not just the work of the pastor, that means that your entire staff, your entire process needs to be designed for succession. Right? So what that means is that, first of all, you need to find a way that any systems that you use, websites, things like that, computers, that where you have passwords, login information, anything like that, you need to have a place where all of that stuff is stored and that somebody can access it. And the way we have it is I use Evernote, which is it's an app. It's a cross-platform app that is it's also browser-based, and so I have a link to a shared Evernote notebook, and that link is written down, and it's in an envelope in our church safe that says, and then the title of it is something like "Open this if Pastor dies." All right, and so if I'm suddenly not able to convey this information to somebody else, there's that envelope, and it's all there. It's all online. They don't need to access my computer, any sensitive files. I don't have any confidential stuff in that notebook. Right? It has a lot of the things, the projects that I'm working on, but nothing confidential. But it also has passwords for all kinds of stuff, login information. It has tutorials. I'm actually still working on this. One of my goals for this year is tutorials for everything that I do, from putting services together to the sort of mentality that goes into the way that we lead our services and why we do it. How we stream our services via YouTube and things like that. All of that stuff, we're making tutorials so that the next person can come in and it's all right there. How do we do this? How do we do that? And then if they want to do it differently, they can. Or they can tweak it or whatever. But so they're not completely lost, and they don't have to start over from scratch. And so if they want to come in and sort of pick up where we left off, and then hopefully they'll take what we're doing and tweak it from there. But that goes to not just for that. All right, I mentioned before my awesome discipleship director. Well, I just got news a month ago that they're moving. They're moving to the other side of the state, and I'm going to miss them terribly because they're wonderful, wonderful people, right? But it also means that discipleship being such a key component of what we do here, that all of a sudden she's leaving and I'm going to need to find a replacement. Well, God provided a replacement, and I'm really thankful for that. But that new guy is going to have a lot of work to do. And because my first discipleship director was told from the beginning, make sure that you are taking notes on what you're doing, that you keep your things organized in such a way so that the next person can come in and pick up where you left off. It's going to be easy transition. Now, she's not leaving for a little while, and so she's actually going to be able to train him. But that's not always going to be possible, so you need to make sure that all of your staff, whatever they're doing, things are set up in such a way so that somebody else can come in and pick up relatively easily where they left off. And that just needs to be a part of how you do things from the start. And so that goes from everybody from from the pastor to your different staff members, the people that oversee different areas, your youth directors, your Sunday school superintendents, your vacation Bible school directors. It means your teachers, your preschool teachers, and your school administrators, and your secretary, and everybody that's on staff. They need to spend some time on a regular basis making sure that plans are in place for succession, so that somebody else can come in, so that if they, the sort of expression goes, if they get hit by a bus and they're gone, somebody else is going to need to come in and pick up where they left off. And it needs to be set up in such a way that that's possible. So thank you. That's all I have. And so then, because I'm not there to do Q&A, I will tell you that you can either, probably the best way to get feedback from me would be to go to this video on YouTube and just leave a comment there. And I get notifications of those comments, and I'd be happy to respond to those. If you have something a little more personal that you want to discuss with me, I'd be happy to help you out. And you can go to our website, shepherdoftheridge.org. There's a contact form there. Or you can email me at pastor@shepherdoftheridge.org. So thanks for this time, and God's blessings on the rest of your conference.